Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're exploring an experience that's incredibly visceral and honestly, pretty universal. Almost all of us have felt it, but very few of us have actually stopped to analyze what's really going on. I'm talking about the act of leaving a space behind. We're going to look at the profound silence of your empty rooms and what that silence is actually trying to tell you. Okay, let's dive into this. So picture this. It's moving day, the boxes are packed, the furniture's completely gone, and you've stripped the curtains from the windows. You're just standing there, right in the middle of the bare volume of what was once your home. And suddenly, as you look around, the room feels, well, unsettlingly larger than you remembered. You start to realize with this kind of creeping sense of unease that either the room literally grew while you weren't paying attention, or maybe you were simply the thing that made it feel so small. You know, you, and maybe the dust bunnies you left behind. There's a saying, an empty room echoes, a full room absorbs. The difference between them is the person who lived there. When you remove all those dampening agents from a room, the plush rugs, the heavy bookshelves, those soft curtains, the walls suddenly give back every single unguarded sound. Your footsteps, your breathing, even the faint hum of a kettle from the kitchen. Everything you do in that space is now echoing back at you, completely unabsorbed. Now, architects and acousticians actually have a fascinating term for this physical shift. They call it an acoustic ghost. This is the raw reverberation that surfaces when a room's dampening agents are removed. You see, without your fabrics and furniture there to act as editors of sound, nothing is taken in anymore. Everything just reflects. So for the very first time, you are actually hearing the room's true voice reflecting back at you. And it's vast, it's indifferent, and it is surprisingly loud. And this brilliantly illustrates that it's not just about acoustics, right? There's a deep psychological shift happening here, known as environmental identity fusion. This is a phenomenon where your cognitive self actually becomes entangled with the physical characteristics of a familiar space. Think about that chair you always keep in the exact same corner, or the way the morning light hits your desk. These repetitions, they actually function as an interior clock for us. So when the room empties, that clock just stops. Your body registers this emptiness as pure disorientation, almost as if a structural piece of your own self was just quietly removed. This brings us to something psychologists call the negative space phenomenon. Have you ever noticed how the trace left by an absence can somehow feel louder and heavier than an actual physical presence? Think of an empty chair at a dinner table, or the starkly empty side of a bed. That specific absence announces itself in a way no physical object ever really could. And it hits us so deeply because what we're reacting to isn't actually what we see, but rather our unmet expectations of what we desperately expect to find there. Here is exactly what your brain is doing in that moment. First, it scans the familiar space. Next, it detects the missing object. Then, it immediately codes that mismatch as an error or a threat. And finally, it just keeps scanning. Your neurological wiring literally treats the gap between expectation and reality as an active threat signal. This is exactly why this stillness in an empty house doesn't feel peaceful, right? It's not restful. Instead, it feels like a frantic, unending search. Your brain is looking for the familiar, finding nothing, and getting stuck in this exhausting loop. Now, before we go too much further, it's really important to point out that this experience isn't totally universal. How we perceive an empty room is heavily shaped by a bunch of different factors. Your cultural attitudes towards solitude, your own personal attachment styles, and even the specific circumstances of why you're leaving all play a massive role here. I mean, an empty room might feel like a profound loss to one person, but a thrilling blank canvas to another. Now, what's really interesting about this comparison is how it highlights two radically different architectural philosophies. On one hand, we have the Japanese concept of ma, treating emptiness as a profound presence. It's a pause that breathes and signifies meaning. On the other hand, we have the Western tradition, which typically views emptiness as something that must be filled. In the West, vacancy is almost seen as a failure, a void we have to immediately plug with furniture and, panic-bought throw pillows. So that deep discomfort you might feel standing in an empty room, it might just be our Western cultural programming made physical. Consider this. The room does not listen to you, but it returns everything you ever meant to say. Just let that sink in for a second. The existential weight of a room that lacks your objects, your purpose, and your story is immense. It's an indifferent container, sure, but it perfectly reflects the exact shape of the life you used to live inside of it. To really wrap our heads around this container idea, we can look at psychoanalyst D.W. Winnicott's concept of the holding environment. Now, this was originally used to describe how a caretaker provides a safe, bounded, non-intrusive space for a child to develop, but we can absolutely transpose this directly to architecture. Think about it. A well-made home acts as this exact psychological container. The physical weight of the walls, the perimeter, the logic of the light, all of this tells your nervous system that you are safely enclosed, you are located, and you are held. But what happens when you move out? Well, that holding environment completely dissolves. The moment those walls are stripped bare, it isn't merely a change of scenery. It's a sudden, often shocking awareness of just how much work those walls were doing for you. You realize, in a split second, exactly how much of your own internal composure was actually just borrowed from the physical structure surrounding you. And this dissolution explains a very specific, very raw human reaction. It's exactly why people often weep in empty houses once the moving truck has finally pulled away. If tears come, it's rarely a grief over missing furniture or packed up carpets. It is a profound, sudden realization that the uncontained self, without its walls, without its secure holding environment, is deeply, deeply fragile. Because of this, we really shouldn't view the empty room as an ending. Instead, try framing it as something closer to the middle of an autopsy. The life that was there has departed, but the distinct outlines remain. It sits in this suspended state, waiting to be painted over, waiting to be refinished, waiting for your family's unique geometry to be slowly overwritten by the geometry of another family moving in. So, the crucial point is this. Before the room forgets you and becomes totally anonymous, it offers one final confession. The walls remember. They remember which side of the bed you chose. They remember exactly how you stood in the kitchen. They remember which lamp you instinctively turned off last. All of those small, unknowing decisions, all of those intimate daily rituals, the house held on to all of it, serving as a silent witness to your life. The empty room is not quiet. It might be entirely devoid of ambient sound, but it is not quiet. You simply have to know how to listen to the house as it returns you to yourself. It's echoing back the truest, most unguarded version of your daily existence, distilled entirely into the architecture of the space you just left behind. Which leaves us with one final lingering question to consider as we wrap up this explainer. What is your empty room trying to tell you? The next time you find yourself standing in the bare volume of a space you're about to leave, or maybe a new space you're about to inhabit, just take a moment. Stop scanning for what isn't there and listen to the heavy silence.